Hey everyone, welcome to the first actual video on my channel. I normally live stream, but recently I've been wanting to make videos, so I thought I would start with a Satisfactory playthrough and get to the end of the current content that's available in the game. I really enjoy logistics games, so if you enjoy them as well, then be sure to stick around the channel because I'll probably be playing other things like Dyson Sphere Program and Factorio as well. So in the first episode here, my first goal was to rush towards the Blade Runners because without those I feel like I can't get around fast enough and it's super slow, so that was the goal for today. As you can see, we started in the desert. I've tried all of the starting locations, but this is my favorite now because there's so much space for building early on. After I loaded in, I ran over to where I usually start, which has 2 copper nodes, 2 limestone nodes, and 2 iron nodes, which are all pretty close to each other.
No.
I also grabbed some Caterium and quartz, as you can see, so that we can scan for them later. Then placed the hub and selected our first milestone, which I went with logistics because I'm not too worried about building early on. Everything I build at the start I usually rip down as soon as I get to coal power anyways, so there's not too much real point in getting that. After I placed the hub, I ran over to set up our first miner and biofuel generator. As you can see, we had a visitor at the iron node, but we took care of that. And now we can claim this land as our own. Early on, I also don't really worry about the neatness of belts and cables, so as you can see, the rat's nest and spaghetti starts up pretty quickly. I've also recently stopped using the generators on the back of the hub because I usually move it around a lot when I'm going around the map, so I usually just set up separate biofuel generators and they output more power anyways, so that's what I did here. After I set those 2 things up, I went over to the copper node so that I could get some copper wires going because we were already running out of those. I was apparently blind because I could not place the miner on top of the copper that was there. We also had a friend at this mining node, and he did in fact not avenge his brother. Spoiler alert. After he was taken care of, we were able to expand the spaghetti factory and get our copper wire setup started. Also, if you guys watching like other games besides logistics games like Satisfactory and Factorio, I will be playing other stuff in the future. I plan to play a hardcore playthrough of Minecraft since I've never done that fully and see how long that'll go for. I also want to play games like Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, probably do a playthrough of Valheim, maybe Cyberpunk as well, so if you guys are interested in that, those will be coming in the future. Now that I had that finished up, I decided to grab some biomass before heading back over to the iron and setting up the constructors for plates and rods. This area here has quite a bit of biomass, so I decided to grab it while I was here. After that, just set up the iron rods and plates, and then we could start up our power. Now I know the way I'm setting this stuff up here will gain some veteran Satisfactory players, but don't worry, it will all be fixed later once I get to coal power. I also tried to keep everything to a minimum at the start so that I have the least amount of biofuel generators as possible before coal. Having to babysit a lot of biofuel generators can get pretty rough in the desert because there's not as much biofuel here, and I didn't feel like running across the map to saw down trees. The next episode's goal will definitely be getting to coal power since I really don't like using the biofuel generators. Once we get coal power and we can stop babying biofuel generators, we'll start building a nice looking factory. I'll probably separate stuff out and use trains once those are unlocked, because having everything in one place tends to get a little bit laggy later on. I also just love using trains. They took me a while to figure out on my first playthrough, but now that I know how they work and how to set them up properly, they're great. Now that the iron's all set up, I crafted our first biomass and put it in our biofuel generator. And as you can see, it went very well.
12 seconds later.
I don't know about you guys, but that looked like a pretty stable power grid startup to me. So to fix that real quick, I just disconnected our whole copper section and quickly decided to add another generator, as one was not enough already. After that was placed, I continued to create the world's best spider web and realized how much I hate the tier 1 power poles. We'll probably unlock tier 2 power poles in the next episode as well. I didn't focus on that in this episode though. Gotta get those blade runners. Now with 2 generators I was able to hook up the copper again and get that going. And now we wait for our milestone materials.
11 minutes later.
After about 11 minutes, we threw what we had into the hub and put some stuff in the storage, which I don't know why I did that, because I have an inventory mod, because I can't stand the small inventory at the start of the game. As for other mods, I have unlocked all alternate recipes, because I don't like going for the hard drives and then waiting 10 minutes for each one, and I also have no fog to make things easier to see if I end up using hypertube launchers. And with that, we launch our first milestone.
Reached. Conveyor belts can now merge, split, and lift to increase the complexity and efficiency of your factory. We encourage you to consider more verticality when it comes to factory logistics to streamline short-range transportation. The productivity display will help you measure and improve the productivity of individual buildings to aid with optimization.
As I ran out of the hub, I forgot to choose the next milestone, so I ran back and grabbed base building. I was going to pick the field research, but I need base building to get up to where the quartz is later for the blade runners anyway, so we went with base building first. So even though earlier I was saying we don't need base building, we actually do to get to the quartz easily. Now with splitters unlocked, I decided to expand some things, and as you can see, this went very well. I completely forgot the miner and the belt was only 60 per minute, so spent a good amount of time here expanding it for 120 iron, but I can only handle 60 right now. After watching this part in my editor, I decided to leave it in and called up a good friend to say,
What are you doing?
I guess as I was playing, my brain forgot to register how much copper is at this node and just kept going and going, and finally near the end here my brain was like, oh yeah, this node only does 60 per minute.
You serious?
And after I realized, I deleted half of everything I just built, and that was that.
Milestone exchange concluded. Fix-it freighter re-entry complete.
As you can see, the actual 60 per minute setup is a little bit simpler, as I only need 2 furnaces. I also set up some cable crafting as well, because I wasn't crafting those yet, and I was running out. One thing I do like about the new update is that they changed the blade runners to the quartz tree and the MAM, so I find it actually easier to get them earlier on now. In the last few versions, when it was still in the Caterium tree, I feel like it took a lot longer to get them. After I set up the cables, I added another biofuel generator so we don't have another meltdown like earlier. And I also set up concrete crafting as well, since we weren't making that either. And we're gonna need some to get the milestone and get up to the quartz. If any of you guys are new to Satisfactory and want me to make tutorials on certain things, let me know what you want to see, because I've gotten pretty decent at this game now, I would say. So I would love to be able to help you guys out. As it's still early in the game, it may not look like I'm that decent, but I usually clean things up pretty well later in the game. I really just tunnel vision into Blade Runners and coal power at the start, so nothing really looks that great until those are done. I don't know if this is a common thing in Satisfactory, but I would assume it probably is, where people don't focus on building anything too crazy until they have automatic power. As I was finishing up on the first concrete setup here, I realized how slow one constructor is early on, so I went over to the other node that I know was close by and brought it over as well. Later on in the game, I usually use these two nodes with the better miners and belts for my main building concrete, and then get concrete for other stuff from elsewhere. I don't know why I decided to make this belt so high up, but I think it was purely just because there's so much foliage and I wanted to be able to see the belt. Later on I'll probably clear out most of this area so that we can build here. And now that that belt has been brought over, we can set up another constructor for concrete. Even with two constructors going, it was still pretty slow, as we'll find out later on, but I need more than I'm making still. But again, I got two tunnel vision into Blade Runner, so I didn't expand the concrete anymore. As I was heading back to the iron setup, I threw what I had in the hub and doubled the iron plates and rods, just to speed it up a little bit, because I know one constructor of each is pretty slow. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but if you guys have any game suggestions that you'd also like to see on the channel other than the ones I already mentioned that I would probably play, let me know. I pretty much like playing anything, so if you guys want to see it, I'll probably enjoy playing it. When I was expanding the iron out, my brain remembered that the belts are only 60 per minute this time, and I only set up one extra furnace on each one. One thing I normally set up early on is screws, but I didn't set it up this time for some reason, and I paid the price later. Purely just because I tunnel visioned on Blade Runner so hard. If you guys play as well, let me know if you tunnel vision on Blade Runners. I'd like to know if that's a common occurrence or if it's just me. I then added more materials to the milestone and waited for our concrete printer to give us enough concrete for the rest. Once enough concrete was printed, I threw it in the hub and selected our next milestone, which was field research, so that we could get the MAM and start researching towards the Blade Runners.
To provide the first needed to build basic factory infrastructure and improved overview. Building these will provide a grid for more advanced organizing and sectioning of your factory.
Even though there's no way for me to automatically make reinforced iron plates, I looked at that logistics 2 for too long, I think. I guess I just really wanted better belts. After that, I thought it was a good idea to set up a automatic biomass crafter, so I don't have to craft it by hand anymore, which makes it a little bit easier to babysit the biofuel generators. Probably the most inefficient biofuel crafter in the existence of Satisfactory, but I usually set one up like this because I don't use it for very long. So I just put 2 storage containers at the start of this, one for leaves and one for wood. Then it pulls it all through and turns it into biomass. And once we unlock obstacle clearing, I can add another constructor at the end of this to turn it into solid biofuel. Once that was done, I brought what I had back to the hub to go towards the field research, and we will find out what happened with the screws. guess that's what happens when you don't set up a crafting setup for screws. Again, I normally have a screw crafter set up, but this time I didn't.
Milestone reached. The molecular analysis machine, referred to as the MAM, will allow our...
Now that we have the MAM, we can start our tunnel vision research to the Blade Runners. And because we picked up that quartz earlier, we could start the research right away. And then prepared very well, as
New
you'll see,
resource added
and
to the resource scanner.
headed over to where the quartz is. Because I've played in this
research
area so
available in the
much,
map.
I kind of just know where all the nodes are at this point.
New recipe unlocked.
And now with that silica researched, I run very quickly over to the quartz. We bring our power line with us to set up the miner over there, as well as the constructors. I usually set up a couple constructors, one for silica and one for the quartz crystals, and then once we unlock the awesome sink, I just dump them in there until I actually start using them later. Here's where you can see I prepared very well for this journey. I definitely brought enough concrete and iron plates. I also, for some reason, have a very hard time trying to get the ramp into a buildable location that I like. After realizing how prepared I was, I ran back to the base. As everything was already going so well, I was delighted when this happened.
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are...
But I guess that's just how it goes on biofuel generators at the start of the game. And because I was away from the base for a little bit, running back and forth to the quartz, enough stuff built up to where I could throw it in the hub for the next milestone. And with the next milestone being obstacle clearing, that will give us access to solid biofuel and the chainsaw. So after we launch this, we craft our chainsaw and go on a little bit of a massacre.
Milestone reached.
I also chopped down quite a few of the trees near our concrete setup as well to clear out that area. Now that we used the chainsaw in the best possible way ever, I threw the leaves and wood into our biomass crafter and also hooked up a storage container at the end for the solid biofuel. I also don't recommend cutting grass with the chainsaw. It's probably not a good idea. Once that was up and running, I went back to the hub to select the next milestone because I forgot when I was there earlier. I end up selecting part assembly so that in the next episode we can set up our reinforced iron plates and rotors to start making smart plating for our first space elevator objective. After that, I made my way back to the quartz area with iron plates and concrete this time and made a ramp up to those so that we can start our miners and constructors up there for the silica and quartz crystals. So I just threw together a really simple silica and quartz crystal setup here. I did a constructor for each because it'll put out 60 quartz a minute, and I'm pretty sure it will run both of these fully since the quartz crystal takes 37.5 raw quartz and the silica takes 22.5, so that fills out the 60 there. I also throw up a power line for later when I set up more miners on the other nodes as well. I didn't have quite enough raw quartz for the quartz crystal research, so I just grabbed 2 off the belt and researched that real quick so that I could throw the recipe into the constructor. And before I decided to leave this area to go do the Blade Runners, I threw in some storage containers at the end there just so that I had some of this stuff built up for later, which will give me access to the LCD screens pretty early on once I get the awesome sink and the ticket booth. And then I can use those to make our factory look a lot nicer and label our buildings with the LCD screens. And with that, I grabbed my silica and ran back to base for the Blade Runners. I also finished up the part assembly milestone because we need the modular frames as well to craft the Blade Runners. And because I still haven't made a screw thing, I had to manually craft 500 more screws.
Milestone reached. More complex assembly of parts can now be automated.
The screw crafting was starting to get a little bit painful, but that's what I get for not setting up an automated one. Now I researched the Blade Runners, and as you can see, we're ready to craft them as soon as I place the equipment workbench.
New equipment unlocked.
And I was just joking. I forgot it needed rotors as well, so that means back to screw crafting, since rotors take 25 screws each. And now we can finally complete the goal that I had, which was Blade Runners for episode 1. As soon as I put them on, I was super excited because I could do the slide jumps again, which is like the #1 way I like to travel around before I get trains and hypertube launchers. And with that, that brings us to the end of the video, so thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the second episode.